U.S. Department of Justice Watchdog said negligence and misconduct led to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein's death in 2019.
Some more breaking news for you. The U.S. Justice Department Watchdog says negligence and misconduct by federal prison officers led to Jeffrey Epstein's death in 2019. The Federal Bureau of Prisons employees who were charged with guarding the accused sex offender, Mr. Epstein, did not search his jail cell as required and failed to check on him for hours before he killed himself in 2019. That's the U.S. Justice Department's internal watchdog. In a scathing new report, Inspector General Michael Horowitz singled out 13 BOP employees for misconduct and dereliction of duties, saying that their actions allowed Epstein to be alone and unmonitored in his solitary cell inside Manhattan's Metropolitan Correctional Center from 10:40 in the evening on the 9th of August 2019 until he was discovered at 6:30 a.m. the following morning. He also criticised the Bureau for other serious operational flaws, such as failing to properly upgrade the Metropolitan Correction Center's camera surveillance system and understaffing its facilities.
Yeah, it's interesting to go back and look at the timeline of events leading up to his death. He was arrested on July 6th. He pled guilty on July 8th. He was assigned to the prison special housing unit known as the SHU on July 10th due to risk factors for suicidality and safety concerns related to him housing in the general population. Then on July 18th, 8 days later, he was denied bail, and on July 23rd, prisoner officers found Epstein on the floor of his cell with a strip of bed sheet around his neck. He was subsequently transferred out of the SHU and placed on suicide watch in the hospital wing, where he was observed 24 hours a day by a staff member or a specially trained inmate companion. This is from a 2019 CNN article. He remained on suicide watch for 24 hours before being transferred to also in the hospital wing. Then on July 30th, he was transferred back into the SHU, required to have an assigned cellmate. And then on July 31st, appeared in court, no sign of injury. So I had forgotten that there was that initial finding of him with the bedsheet around his neck, for which there was the intervention. So there was a clear indication that there was a risk here. And then after that, his cellmate was transferred out of his cell on August 9th. And then the officers that were to be discussed here, who were supposed to be checking in regularly on these shifts, who did not do so negligently, were assigned on August 9th and falsified their counts of having gone back and forth and checked on him in the cell. And then he died shortly thereafter.
The New York Times describes the Watchdog report as them finding a remarkable and largely unexplained succession of circumstances that you just laid out, allowing him to hoard extra blankets, bedding, clothing, even after his initial attempt to hang himself. They violated a standing order intended to prevent him from self-harm by allowing him to remain alone in his cell for a full day. After one official sent an email to 70 employees warning them that this was very dangerous. So, yes, they undertook an exact series of steps that was going to make it possible for him to attempt to kill himself and maybe succeed again, and that's what he did.
Yeah, I mean, and this is why so many people are skeptical of the circumstances. Did Jeffrey Epstein kill himself? People put he killed himself in kind of these scare quotes, suggesting that it was not actually a suicide. But even if it were a suicide, there's this question of whether or not it was purposefully allowed, knowing that he had suicidal ideology, because of what might come out if he were to actually testify, and the number of incredibly important and influential and wealthy people that he had relationships with.
The way I feel about this, though, what jumps out to me from reading all these reports and all the information about the circumstances is just the tremendous bureaucratic indifference to human life that characterizes the prison system in general.
Absolutely.
I mean, people kill themselves in prison. People are murdered in prison. People traffic drugs in prison. You want to get drugs off our streets? We can't even get them out of our prisons. They can't keep drugs out of prisons, which speaks to the futility of trying to keep them out of everywhere else. But this is going on all the time. There are gangs of of criminals and Nazis and everything that is allowed to flourish and proliferate in prisons. No serious attempt to grapple with safety and the cameras are always broken. There's
for sure, and it's worth noting that many people in jail are not convicted of crimes yet, including, frankly, Jeffrey Epstein was not yet convicted of a crime, and that there are people that are being held for pre-trial detention for years, like Khalif Browder, who died. He was arrested. He was charged with stealing a backpack, and because of the length they had to wait for trial, ended up dying in prison before he was ever able to go to trial.
So people say,
at 16 years old.
How could you accept it's way too convenient that the cameras weren't working and they forgot to check on him and he had all this stuff like that sometimes they just do a bad job or they don't care.
I take your point.
They don't care about him staying alive. These are not the most like rigorously trained and well-paid and happy and greatest.
I take your point, Robby, but I don't think that this is that situation. This is not an anonymous kid from New York, Khalif Browder. This is Jeffrey Epstein, who the whole world was watching as he was taken into custody. And given that we have seen...
But the whole world are not the people in charge of the prison.
Right, but the people in charge of the prison knew he had a suicide attempt, explicitly assigned him to increasingly safe wards, put him in the hospitalized... in a shoe to protect him, and then in the hospitalized ward after his. No, but they did. The point is that they did care, and they did intervene, and they did make a special acknowledgement of this person having an elevated suicide risk, and also being someone of public interest, and put metrics into place to protect him. And then, suspiciously, the reason why people are this is a negligence case against these guards. This is a negligence issue. The issue is why they did not do what they were told to do. So this one corrections officer, Tova Noel, a 31-year-old officer at MCC, had 2 back-to-back 8-hour shifts. He had been employed as a correctional officer since about 2016, so a few years. It was him and an unnamed officer, officer number 1. They did not perform a required 4 p.m. institutional count, according to videos, basically checking off that they went and they checked on him and they saw him there. And they falsified a slip saying that they did. Now, it's one thing to just slack off at your job. It happens. People do it. But to know that this is a high-profile individual, of all of the cases to slack off, knowing that you're going to get caught because this is one of the most famous people that has ever been in this prison, that seems like an interesting choice. And I think that is why there's so much suspicion around this particular event.
I think they didn't care. I think this is broadly characteristic of prison. I'm sure there are better prisons and worse prisons, but this seems broadly characteristic.
Well, meanwhile, a U.S. judge granted preliminary approval to J.P. Morgan Chase's $290 million settlement with women who said Epstein abused them and that the bank ignored the late financier's sex trafficking. So, of course, this case is ongoing even without Jeffrey Epstein. Right. There was this effort in this Virgin Islands case to hold J.P. Morgan accountable for continuing to do business with Jeffrey Epstein at a time during which they allegedly should have realized that they were facilitating his ability to predate on these young women, girls, really. So, and that case has yielded some interesting information, and I think from an institutional perspective is really useful to following up. But the fundamental truth is that the person who knew everything was Jeffrey Epstein. And because of, at minimum, gross negligence.
Gross negligence, for sure. He
is not here to talk.
A very typical, very usual gross negligence. I mean, they should keep looking into it. If they find something more, some evidence of some desire on their part to have him die, or I know the full conspiracy, right, would be that someone slipped in to get him, or I guess paid them or arranged it so that this would happen. By all means, if there's more evidence of that, let's pursue it. It's just not that unusual to me.
I mean, didn't you just point out that there were an unusual number of linens being made available to him, especially given that he had already tried to hang himself?
No, it was. They should not have allowed him to do that. Yes.
Yeah, I mean.
But they don't. I mean. I don't think they care that he was someone special. They're like, I go to the DMV, I'm someone special. I'm someone more special than me. They don't care. They're not.
If you're a corporation, if you're an institution, and you can be sued for negligence because you have contributed to the cause of death of someone who was in your institutional care. And you will care more if the person involved is famous, if they have a wealthy family that has the means to see you and follow up, if you're going to get a lot of negative press as a consequence of doing so, much more so than if you happen to let someone who was indigent, who didn't have family with resources, who was not a public figure, die. And so, yes, I'm not saying that they should care because corrections officers have warm, fuzzy feelings in the bottom of their heart and are humanitarians. I'm saying that there is a financial incentive for these kinds of institutions to want to specifically not be on the hook for letting one of the most high-profile defendants in the history of America to die in their custody. And instead of showing the perhaps average substandard level of care that you might expect in an institution like this, it was even less than that, according to some of what these timelines and such suggest. That's all I'm saying.
I think it shows when you're in the prison system, it doesn't matter who you are, how important you think you are, how wealthy you are, the pathologically indifferent treatment can get anyone in the end.
All right. Well, we'll have more Rising for you right after this.